My 29-year-old daughter, who is married, demanded I pay her house rent or she will disown me as her father. Her mom supported her and said, "She is your daughter. You must pay or you will lose both of us." I smiled and said goodbye to them. I will tell you what happened next. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, it will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout-out in our next story. Today's special shout-out goes to Danny Finley from New York. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. I never thought the first real betrayal would come dressed so plainly. No slammed doors. No screaming. Just a phone call that started with, "Hey, Dad," and ended with a threat to never speak to me again. My name is Carl Henderson, and for most of my life, I was the guy everyone counted on. Quiet, reliable. I worked 35 years in logistics, paid off the mortgage early, never missed a birthday. I'm not flashy. I don't make speeches. I just show up. That was the role I played. For my wife Marcia, for my daughters, for everyone. But somewhere along the way, I think they forgot I was a person too. It was a Monday afternoon, around 3:20 p.m. I was in the garage, organizing some old tools when my phone rang. It was my oldest daughter, Lacey. She's 29 now, married just 2 years ago to a man I barely know. We were close once. At least, I thought we were. I answered with a smile in my voice, expecting maybe a question about a home repair or how to change the air filter in her car. Instead, she launched into it like it was already decided. "I need you to cover our rent this month," she said flatly, as if it were a routine transaction. "Lacey, what's going on?" I asked, already feeling the unease settle in my chest. "Is everything okay?" "No," she snapped. "We're behind. And if you care about me, if you want me in your life, you'll do this. I won't ask again." The words hit like a low blow. Not just because of the ask, but because of the coldness behind it. There was no vulnerability, no softness. Just entitlement wrapped in emotional extortion. I paused. Too long, apparently. "So that's it," she continued. "You're going to choose your money over your daughter?" "Lacey, it's not about the money," I said quietly. "It's how you're asking." Then came the second punch. "I'm your daughter. You owe me." I sat down on the step of the garage, staring at the floor like it might give me some guidance. I wanted to ask where this version of her came from. Was it the marriage? The stress? Had we failed to teach her humility? But the truth settled quickly. Lacey wasn't asking for help. She was delivering an ultimatum. That night, I brought it up to Marcia, thinking maybe we could talk sense into her together. I thought, foolishly, that my wife would see it the way I did. "She's your daughter," Marcia said without hesitation. "And if you let her walk away over something so small, then you'll lose both of us." I blinked. "You're siding with her? She's family. You must pay. Period." That word, must, did something to me. All my life, I'd done things out of love, out of duty, sure, but never because someone commanded me to. My chest felt tight, not from anger, but from something colder. Realization. My wife wasn't asking me to help. She was delivering her own ultimatum, piggybacking off our daughters. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply stood up from the table, looked them both in the eye, and said, "Okay." Marcia crossed her arms. "Okay what?" "Okay, goodbye." Lacey scoffed like she didn't believe me. Marcia blinked in disbelief. And I walked out of that kitchen with a calm I didn't expect. There was no drama in my exit. No shattered glass or slammed doors. Just silence and my footsteps down the hallway. That night, I checked into a modest hotel 10 minutes from home. I sat on the bed, stared at the ceiling, and tried to understand how the people I'd loved most could turn love into a transaction. I thought about all the birthdays, the dance recitals, the hospital visits. I'd shown up for every moment that mattered. And now I was being asked to pay for their affection like it was a monthly subscription. I didn't sleep much, but I knew what I had to do next. Chapter 2. The smile and the goodbye. I woke up the next morning with a numbness that felt almost medicinal. The kind of emotional anesthesia you develop when you finally stop trying to patch things that have been leaking for years. The hotel coffee was bitter, the kind that clung to your tongue and left you more tired than awake. I didn't check my phone. I didn't call my wife. I sat in that dimly lit room with yesterday's silence still echoing in my ears, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to ask the question, do they love me, or do they just expect me to show up and hand things over? I wasn't angry yet. That would come later. What I felt in that moment was something far colder. Disappointment mixed with clarity. I started running back through every interaction with Lacey over the past few years, looking for the turning point. When had our talks stopped being conversations and turned into invoices? Was it when she started dating Eric, her husband? Was it when she got married and suddenly stopped asking how I was, and only called when she needed something? Or had she always seen me as an emergency fund with a father's face? By noon, I checked out of the hotel. I didn't go home. I drove. No destination, just the open road, the hum of the tires against asphalt, and the kind of peace you only find when you're finally alone with the truth. I ended up at a lakeside park, sat on a bench for what must have been 2 hours. Around me, families were laughing, kids feeding ducks, couples taking selfies. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. Not in the way I had been at home. When I finally turned my phone back on, there were 3 missed calls from Marcia and 2 from Lacey. No voicemails. Just a trail of unanswered calls like digital footprints leading back to a place I no longer wanted to enter. I didn't call back. I didn't text. I sat with the discomfort of not responding, and strangely, it started to feel good. That evening, I returned home. I walked into the kitchen and saw Marcia at the sink, rinsing vegetables like it was any other day. She didn't turn around. She just said, "You can't just disappear like that." "I needed space," I said. "From your family?" she snapped, finally turning to face me. Her eyes weren't red, not swollen, just annoyed, like I'd been an inconvenience. "Yes, from you. From this house. From being treated like a bank with shoes." She rolled her eyes. "You're being dramatic." I studied her face, searching for even a flicker of recognition, of understanding, but there was nothing. Just the same look she gave when the remote batteries died or the Wi-Fi went out. Mild irritation. No depth. "Lacey's your daughter," she said again. "She was desperate, and you abandoned her." "No," I said calmly. "She gave me a choice. I made it." "She'll cut you off for this," she warned. I nodded. "If that's the cost of peace, I'll pay it." Marcia scoffed. "You're choosing ego over family." "No," I said, voice steady, eyes locked on hers. "I'm choosing myself. Something none of you have done in a long time." She didn't respond, just stood there, jaw tight, as if waiting for me to backtrack. I didn't. Instead, I gave her a sad smile. Not out of spite, but out of something even heavier, acceptance. I had loved this woman for over 30 years. We'd built a home, raised children, faced losses, celebrated wins. But in that moment, I realized something painful and simple. She had stopped seeing me as her husband long ago. I was a function, a fixture, like the water heater or the garage door opener. Necessary, but replaceable. That night, I moved my things into the guest room. I slept with the door locked, not out of fear, but out of finality. And the next morning, I made the call. My lawyer was a guy named Rick that I used years ago when handling my mother's estate. Reliable. Sharp. No frills. "I need to file for divorce," I told him. Quietly, but formally. There was a pause. "Carl," he said slowly. "You sure?" "I've never been more sure." The next few days passed like the quiet before a thunderstorm. The house was cold, not in temperature, but in energy. We didn't speak unless necessary. Dinner was eaten in separate rooms. Marcia stopped looking at me like a husband. Now I was just an obstacle. A man who'd said no when she expected obedience. Then, 7 days later, I stood in the driveway, watching as the courier handed her the envelope. She opened it, and her face drained in real time. First confusion, then panic, then fury. She turned to look at me, papers in hand, mouth slightly agape. "You filed," she gasped. "You actually filed?" I didn't flinch. I didn't yell. I didn't offer some self-righteous speech. I just said what needed to be said. "You can't threaten me. I will always choose my peace." She blinked. For a moment, she looked small, not the woman who had demanded obedience, but a person realizing they'd pushed too far. I didn't wait for a reply. I turned, walked inside, and shut the door behind me. The silence after serving someone divorce papers is nothing like in the movies. There's no screaming in the rain, no dramatic piano music, no last-ditch apologies. Just the sound of breath, short, angry, shallow, and the quiet realization that a boundary has finally been drawn in permanent ink. Marcia didn't come to bed that night. I didn't expect her to. She stayed in the master bedroom while I remained in the guest room. The door shut, the television humming softly, not watched, but left on for company. I wasn't grieving the marriage. That had died long before the paperwork. I was grieving the illusion that somewhere deep down, if I gave enough, provided enough, stayed long enough, they'd love me for who I was, not what I offered. The morning after, I made myself a cup of coffee, same as always. Marcia stood in the kitchen like a ghost, barely acknowledging me. The paper sat on the table between us like a loaded weapon. She hadn't signed it yet. She was still in the bargaining phase, I think, believing this was just a bluff, that I'd get tired of the Cold War and crawl back into the role of quiet provider. But I wasn't bluffing. Something had snapped in me, not loudly, not violently, but with the quiet finality of a rope pulled too tight for too long. I watched her pretend not to look at me while texting furiously. I already knew who she was texting. Lacey. By that afternoon, I got my first call. My younger brother, Jeff. "What the hell's going on?" he asked, his voice a mix of confusion and concern. "I filed for divorce," I told him flatly. He was quiet for a moment. "Over the rent thing?" "No," I said. "That was just the final straw." Jeff sighed. "You want to talk?" We met later that night at a bar just outside town. Dark, quiet, familiar. We sat in a booth near the back, nursing beers like old men. I told him everything. Lacey's demand, Marcia's ultimatum, the years of being taken for granted. Jeff nodded slowly. "Man, I always thought Marcia was a little, how do I put it, domineering. But I figured it worked for you." "Guess I was wrong." I shrugged. "I let it work for too long. That's on me." He clinked his bottle against mine. Better late than never. But not everyone took it that way. The next morning, my phone buzzed with notifications, texts, missed calls, and then a string of screenshots sent to me by my niece, Rachel. Lacey had gone public. She'd posted a long, passive-aggressive rant on Facebook. No names, but clear enough. When your own father abandons you in your time of need over money, you realize who really loves you. Comments poured in, supportive ones, angry ones, and the worst kind. The vague, pitying, praying for you, cis variety. A few extended family members messaged me privately, asking for my side. I didn't respond. What bothered me wasn't that Lacey aired our dirty laundry. It was how she twisted the story. Not a word about the threat. Not a mention of her demand. Just a carefully curated narrative where she was the victim and I was a cold, greedy man who discarded his own daughter. I felt my stomach churn. Not with guilt, but with disgust. I took a walk to clear my head, circling the neighborhood 3 times before ending up on a bench by the park. I was halfway through my 3rd lap when a voice called out, "Uncle Carl." I turned. It was Rachel, my sister's daughter. Early 20s, studying social work, sharp as a tack. She looked hesitant, holding a coffee and wearing that worried look young people get when they see someone older breaking down in real time. I saw what Lacey posted, she said gently, sitting beside me. "You okay?" "I'm not broken," I said. "Just done pretending I'm not being used." She nodded. "Good." That one word, good, hit deeper than I expected. Not because it validated me, but because it was the first time someone said it out loud without making me feel like a monster. "You don't owe anyone an explanation," she added. "But I'm glad you stood up for yourself. A lot of people never do." We sat in silence for a moment. Then she asked, "Do you think you'll ever speak to Lacey again?" I didn't have an answer. I still don't. Later that evening, Marcia approached me in the hallway. She didn't knock. She just opened the door and stood there, arms crossed, face tense. "So this is it?" she asked. "You're really going through with it?" "Yes. And you don't even care what people are saying?" "I care more about what I'm feeling for the first time in years." She let out a dry laugh. "You're throwing away 30 years over one disagreement." I stood. "No. I'm walking away from 30 years of being expected to carry everyone else's emotional debt." She opened her mouth to reply, then closed it. Something flickered in her eyes, maybe recognition, maybe fear. I didn't push. I simply said, I won't be the villain in your version of this story, but I also won't stay in it. And I walked past her. I hadn't expected the ripple effect to hit so fast. One moment, I was reclaiming my peace. The next, I was the center of a whispered scandal stretching from church pews to cousin group chats. People I hadn't spoken to in months suddenly had opinions, and none of them asked for context. It wasn't just Lacey's post anymore. It was the story being passed around like a shared casserole dish. Carl left his wife because he wouldn't help his daughter. That's how it started. The narrative didn't need to be true. It just needed to be juicy. I stopped attending church after overhearing two women at the back whispering as I walked in. He's the one who kicked his daughter out over money, one said, loud enough to make sure I heard. I turned around and left before the first hymn. That Sunday, I drove aimlessly for hours, windows down, trying to shake the feeling of being a villain in a play I never auditioned for. I wasn't ashamed. I was just tired. Tired of being misunderstood, tired of the whispering, tired of realizing how quickly people chose sides without asking why I'd finally drawn the line. Back home, things had shifted. Marcia stopped pretending we were in a Cold War. She started fighting back. Passive-aggressively, of course. She left bills on the kitchen counter addressed to both of us. She forgot to wash my clothes when she did laundry. She even invited Lacey over without telling me. I came home one evening to the sound of her voice drifting from the kitchen, that high, tight tone she used when she was trying to be the bigger person. I didn't walk in. I didn't want to see her, but I couldn't unhear the words. He's changed, Lacey was saying. Like he doesn't even care anymore. It's like he's cold. I know, Marcia replied. It's like he's not even your father. That stung. Not because it was untrue, but because it was so easy for them to erase me once I stopped complying. I waited in the garage until she left. Then I walked in, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and said nothing. Marcia didn't look up. She just said, you know she cried herself to sleep last night. I took a sip. So did I. She glared at me, furious that I wouldn't bend, that I wouldn't apologize for choosing peace over performance. The next morning, I found a voicemail from Lacey. Her voice was low, shaky. I don't understand what happened to you, Dad. You used to be kind. You used to love me. Now you're punishing me because I asked for help. What happened to you? I sat there, listening to it 3 times. Then I hit delete. What happened to me? I stopped abandoning myself to make everyone else comfortable. That weekend, Rachel came by again, this time with lunch and a small potted plant. I figured your kitchen could use something green, she said with a smile. She was the only one who didn't treat me like I'd gone rogue. She offered updates. Some family members were concerned, others were disappointed, and a few, quietly, were proud. You know, she said as we ate. It's kind of wild watching someone do the thing everyone else is too scared to. What's that? I asked. Walk away. Her words echoed later that evening when I finally sat down and wrote a letter to Marcia. Not because I wanted to mend things, but because I needed to be clear. I wrote that I would be moving forward with the divorce, that I didn't hate her, but I no longer recognized the partnership we once shared. I reminded her that peace isn't something you can demand from someone else while holding a knife behind your back. I left it on the table before going to bed. The next day, it was gone. No response. Just silence. Then, a text from Lacey. You've made your choice. Don't ever contact me again. I stared at it for a long while. My finger hovered over the keyboard. For a split second, I thought of responding, explaining, maybe even apologizing, not for the decision, but for the pain. But I didn't. I locked my phone and looked out the window, where the sun was setting over our overgrown backyard. The light cast long shadows across the fence line, and for the first time in weeks, I noticed how quiet everything had gotten. Not lonely, just quiet. And quiet, I realized, was a start. She didn't knock. That was the first sign. Just opened the front door and stepped into my living room like it still belonged to her. Lacey had always moved like that, like the world owed her space, and she never needed to ask for it. She stood there in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes already brimming with accusation. Her hair was pulled into a tight bun, the same way she wore it when she was a teenager and needed to feel in control. Behind her, The sun spilled in across the hardwood floor, casting a long shadow that made her look taller than she was. She didn't say hello. "You really served Mom divorce papers over this?" she asked, her voice shaking with restrained fury. I looked up from my book and set it down slowly. I didn't stand. I didn't offer her a drink. I wasn't playing host. Not anymore. "I served your mother divorce papers because this family stopped being a partnership the moment I was given ultimatums instead of love." She let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Oh, so now you're the victim?" I didn't blink. I didn't say that. Her jaw clenched, and for a moment, she looked less like a grown woman and more like the little girl who used to run to me when she scraped her knees. "You know what hurts the most?" she said, voice rising. "It's not that you said no. It's that you didn't even care how desperate I was. You just walked away." I stood then. Slowly, deliberately. My knees cracked the way they always did now. A reminder of how many years I spent kneeling to fix things that were never mine to break. "You asked for money," I said quietly. "But what you handed me was a threat. You said you'd disown me. That's not desperation, Lacey. That's coercion." She blinked, taken aback. "If you had come to me with tears," I continued, "with a humble heart, or even just with honesty, I would have moved mountains for you. I have before. But you didn't ask. You demanded. You didn't need a father. You needed a sponsor." Her face flushed red, and I could see the words catching in her throat. She stepped forward, hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You don't get to rewrite history," she spat. "You weren't perfect. You were always distant. Always quiet. You think just because you paid for things and showed up at recitals that makes you a good dad." "No," I said. "What makes me a good dad is that I still showed up even when none of you saw me." We were both breathing hard now. The house felt smaller with both of us in it, the air thick with the weight of years unspoken. I walked past her toward the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. She followed. "Mom says you've lost your mind," she said, voice suddenly smaller. I turned. "Your mother lost something too. Respect. For me. For the marriage. She decided that your threat was acceptable, and that if I didn't comply, I'd lose both of you. That was her choice. I'm just honoring it. You could have come to me," she whispered, "before you did all this." I stared at her for a long moment. She wasn't yelling anymore, just pleading in a way that was more about being heard than being forgiven. "I didn't think you'd listen," I said. "Because love that comes with a condition isn't love. And you made your condition loud and clear." For a moment, I thought she might cry. Her lips trembled, and her arms wrapped around herself like armor. Then she turned away. "I can't believe you," she said, walking toward the door. "You're really choosing yourself over your family." I didn't follow her. "I'm choosing sanity over sacrifice," I said calmly. "Peace over performance. And if that means losing people who only love me when I say yes, then so be it." She paused in the doorway, hand on the frame. "Goodbye, Dad." I didn't reply. I just nodded. And then she was gone. The door clicked shut behind her, and I stood in the silence that followed, heart pounding, chest tight, not from regret, but from grief. The kind that comes not from doing something wrong, but from finally doing something right that cost you everything. I walked into the kitchen, sat down at the table, and stared at my hands. They looked older now, a little more weathered, but steady, strong, and more mine than they'd felt in years. The house was quieter now, not just in sound but in energy. No footsteps echoing through the hallways. No tension pressed into the air like a film of humidity you couldn't escape. Just stillness. A different kind of silence than before. Not the silence of resentment, but of restoration. The kind you get when a wound finally scabs over. Marcia moved out 2 weeks after our last conversation. No goodbye, no explanation. Just a stack of her boxes by the door and a silent Uber idling in the driveway. I didn't help her carry anything. I didn't ask where she was going. That part of me, the man who bent over backward to keep things civil, convenient, unruffled, that version of Carl was buried now, quietly, and without ceremony. I had the locks changed the next day. Not out of spite, but because I needed a clean slate. That weekend, I cleared out the master bedroom. The dresser still smelled like her perfume. I boxed up the remaining clothes she left behind and donated them. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel anger anymore. Just relief, like a rope that had been cinched around my chest for years was finally cut loose. I slept in that bed alone for the first time in a decade, and when I woke up the next morning, it was the best rest I'd had in years. The paperwork moved quickly. Rick, my lawyer, called with updates every few days. She's not contesting, he said one morning. Rachel texted me now and then, short check-ins and photos of her dog. She never pushed. She never tried to bridge the gap. She just let me have space, and that, more than anything, made me feel understood. Then, one rainy afternoon, a small envelope appeared in my mailbox. No return address. Just my name written in handwriting I hadn't seen in years. Small, neat, slanted like her mother's. Inside was a folded piece of notebook paper. At first, I thought it was a letter. But as I unfolded it, I realized what it was, a poem. Not a new one. An old one. Lacey had written it in 3rd grade. I remembered it because I kept it in my wallet for years. My daddy is the moon, it was titled. He's quiet but always there. He keeps the night safe. He makes the dark feel okay. There was nothing else inside. No apology. No explanation. Just that poem, like a tiny memory from a time before conditions, before demands, before the lines had been drawn. I didn't cry, but I did sit with it for a long time. Ran my fingers along the edges. Read it aloud once, softly. Then I folded it back up and placed it in my top drawer. That wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't a bridge. But it was a whisper. A reminder that the version of her who loved me, without question, had once existed. Whether she'd return or not was out of my control. I'd stopped chasing closure. Now, I let things come when they came, or not at all. I started gardening again. Just the basics. Tomatoes, herbs, some succulents along the windowsill. The physical act of nurturing something that didn't ask questions, didn't judge, didn't threaten. It soothed something in me I hadn't realized was still raw. I joined a walking group on Sundays. Mostly retirees and widowers. We didn't talk much, just walked, watched birds, shared tips on knee braces. It was enough. Sometimes, in the early morning, I'd make coffee and sit on the porch, watching the neighborhood wake up. Kids riding bikes, dogs pulling leashes, couples bickering playfully over whose turn it was to grab breakfast. I'd sit with my hands around the mug and remind myself that peace wasn't loud. It didn't make declarations. It didn't demand loyalty. Peace just was, and for the first time in a long time, it lived here. I didn't regret my decision. Not for a second. People like to romanticize family as unconditional. But the truth is, love with terms is just control in disguise. And I had finally, stepped out of that cage. Not because I stopped loving them, but because I started loving myself enough to stop bleeding for people who only noticed when I stopped. Have you ever had to choose peace over family? If this story resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on the boundaries you've set or wish you had. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might help someone else find the courage to walk away from conditional love. And if you want more real-life stories about family, betrayal, and reclaiming your peace, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep telling the truth, one chapter at a time. See you soon in the next story.